Hello, I'm Casey Aiken, and this is 21 This Week. Coming up next, MCPS parents petition Supreme Court over a parental rights issue. Why did the County Council Public Safety Committee vote against the Freedom to Leave Act? Will Montgomery County voters vote to term limit County Executive Marc Elrich? And how will Maryland voters decide the amendment to the Maryland Constitution that guarantees a right to abortion that some say is unnecessary because it's already in the law? Our panel of insiders will give you the story behind the story. We're joined by former county council member and past president at Rebuilding Together Montgomery County, Nancy Floreen, and vice chairman of the Montgomery County Republican Central Committee, Stacey Sauter. Stay tuned for these stories and more on the next 21 This Week. Does it take a village to raise a child, or is it the parent's responsibility? The essence of this question is being asked by a group of Montgomery County parents who have petitioned the United States Supreme Court to allow them to opt out when LGBTQ plus storybooks are used in Montgomery County public school classrooms. The focus of this case began in the 22-23 school year when MCPS sought to introduce 7 books in the lower grades that supported the LGBTQ movement, not only in sex education classes, but also in general literature classes. When parents objected, MCPS in March of 23 announced that opt-outs would no longer be allowed for this subject. This action sparked the series of litigation that now spreads to the doorsteps of the Supreme Court. Nancy, the court is not being asked to rule on the merits of the case, but it's a procedural issue whether parents were entitled to injunction. But going back to what MCPS did in 2023, isn't there an action against parents' rights? Don't they have the right to determine what their children are seeing and not seeing?
Well, as I understand it, right now this is an appeal from a decision by the Federal Court of Appeals. So that's what's positioned it where it is. What the court found that there was no burden on their right to exercise religion, and there was no demonstrated link really on how the teachers were using this material. As it was, the state had told the school districts in the state throughout the state not to permit opt-outs. So it's really not Montgomery County's fault under any scenario. They're just following what the State Board of Education told them to do.
Stacey, Nancy mentioned the Federal Court of Appeals case. It wasn't a unanimous opinion. It was a 2-1 decision. And the circuit judge, A. Marvin Quattlebaum, wrote that parents have shown the board's decision to deny religious opt-outs burden these parents' rights to exercise their religious beliefs and direct religious upbringing of their children by putting them to the choice of either compromising their religious beliefs or foregoing a public education for the children. Shouldn't parents be allowed the opportunity to opt out if it's offensive to them on religious grounds?
Casey, it's an interesting question because to me, the answer is both objective and subjective. And it's like Justice Potter Stewart, his definition of pornography. Remember, you know it when you see it, right? And from an objective viewpoint, a major component of gender identity involves sexuality, right? And of which I presume most of these very young children are pretty clueless. So theoretically, you're introducing sex into the curriculum with these books, and the parents know it when they see it. From a subjective religious perspective, I think many parents are voicing strong moral and, clear objections because the material just does not sync with their values. So either let the curriculum go for these younger kids or let the parents who pay their salaries, by the way, opt out. I will say, having said that I do believe it's important to teach young kids that parents come in all kinds of packages and, without getting into sexuality per se. And by this, I mean, I don't have any objection to children being taught that some kids are raised by their grandparents, 2 dads, 2 moms, a guardian, whatever. But I think that provides kind of a sense of inclusion for some kids who aren't being raised in a traditional role or mold. But when it's age appropriate, then perhaps you introduce the concepts of sexual attraction apart from sex or procreation itself. So the bottom line for me is that I do clearly believe that parents have the right to opt out, and those accommodations should be made. So I can't handicap how the court will treat this. Nancy made some strong points about the state board, but we're here in Montgomery County paying with our property taxes, et cetera, to support this school system. We should have a right.
Well, I mean, it's interesting, the coalition of individuals that have brought this case. It's not just one religious sect. It's many that have brought it. And so at this stage, we haven't even gotten to whether or not the merits of the case are being discussed. It's really a procedural issue, whether they're entitled to a permanent injunction, that there's such a great harm that has been raised at this juncture that they're seeking the injunction for. So I guess we'll just have to wait and see if the court even takes this case up. But ultimately, it'll go back to the circuit court for a decision as to whether or not the merits of the case are appropriate. And Nancy, you could be very right. It could be that they will lose on standing grounds because it's the State Board of Education that they should have sued, and not just Montgomery County. So any last comments?
Casey, I think personally that you're going to be hitting on several topics today that actually involve parents' rights. And so we're hearing them speak up louder and more clearly about what they deem is appropriate for their children.
Well, thanks. So, one of the things I love about this show is reading the political tea leaves. I mean, the goings on up in Rockville at Stella B. Warner are just always kind of fascinating. Nancy, I hope you chuckle at that. So, reading the tea leaves is much an art as it is sport, and who on the council has influenced who's moving the ball down the field and which council member has lost the thread. For the past several years, the more progressive wing of the council has championed legislation that has restricted law enforcement. And in general, the public has tolerated and supported these reforms as long as they were really focused on police accountability. After a year-long effort by Council Member Will Jawando to prohibit police consent searches, the county's Public Safety Committee voted 2-1 in opposing the bill. Nancy, for several years, Jawando has been at the forefront of advocacy to limit police power, yet in this instance, he seems to have gotten ahead of the curve. He has few allies on the council, and he's the sole sponsor of the bill. Has the political shift, has there been a shift in political power, or is this just a bad idea?
Well, I have to say, since I was on the council, it's been 6 years now, the new council members are, frankly, more purely political, I think. And this is one of those cases where I think Mr. Jawando and Ms. Mink in particular are, sort of putting out their personal political agenda. And it really doesn't matter if you get some things passed. You get a platform in which to enunciate your points of view. And, you put that on your resume and you make your point. So obviously, this particular piece of legislation does not have a lot of steam, but it has been a platform. Will has run for a higher office. He's very involved in other kinds of politics. And this is, I'm sure, designed to establish his credibility in the progressive world and with respect to police behavior. And so I doubt he's losing any sleep over this. He's making his point.
That's an interesting summation.
I mean, I'm a little cynical, but
well, I mean, that's the whole point of watching the political maneuverings go, that are ongoing, because a bit of it is cynicism. And Stacey, has the public mood, shifted in favor of more law and order, a result of being fed up with the rise in crime in the county? Or is this, as I said before, is this just a bad bill that, that got thrown in the hopper?
Unequivocally, yes to both. I'm jumping ahead here a little bit, Casey, because we'll talk about limiting the county executive to 2 terms, but I was an active petitioner on that campaign, and I cannot even count the number of people who expressed deep dismay over the direction the county was headed in, especially and in no small part due to the crime And, just as a small example of what's going on, I stopped at a gas station in Gaithersburg last week, and there was a warning sign to protect your valuables and lock your car while pumping gas. It made me recall the Beltway sniper incident back in 2002. I was ducking behind my car while pumping gas. And it's that kind of same level of fear. You have to be, your head has to be on a swivel at all times. And that's the level of fear in our county right now. I've heard from people across the county about random burglaries and robberies, and particularly in areas that were once considered safe havens. No one is safe anymore. And I believe that the result of the sort of social justice efforts to minimize how police could do their jobs most effectively has led to sustained and presently unrecoverable attrition in the force. And the cops are not likely to respond to a break-in with any urgency, and unless blood has been drawn, and only because they're just completely stretched thin.
The author of Montgomery Perspective does a great job on reporting on the police staffing issues, and I'm sure we're going to hear more to come about that in the future, because this is a critical issue. I mean, people want to be safe in their houses, and we've been blessed in Montgomery County to actually have a wonderfully safe environment to grow up in and live in and raise our families. So more on this to come. In 2016, Montgomery County voters passed an amendment to the county charter restricting the county executive and the council members to 3 terms in office. This November, in the election, county voters will decide whether to further amend the county charter to limit the county executive to 2 terms instead of 3. Stacey, the LA Times wrote that a poll conducted by Berkeley researchers on behalf of the Evelyn and Walter Jr. Haas Fund found bipartisan support for restricting how long local officials can serve, with majorities of both Republicans, Democrats, and nonpartisan. Their preference was 2 terms, 2 4-year terms. I bring that out only because there isn't a lot of good polling as to what the mood of the public is, but it's significant that we would see that out in Los Angeles. So you said you were involved in the effort to get the petition on the ballot. Tell us about this.
Oh my goodness. Well, first of all, it was signed by 20,000 people. 16,000 signatures were validated. We needed 10,000 to get it on the ballot, and 1/3 Republicans, 1/3 Democrats, and 1/3 independents signed it. So what does that tell you? Let's put this into a little bit of perspective. Like, if your child starts kindergarten or first grade, rather, when Elrich was first elected as the county executive, and if he continues through a 3rd term, they will be graduating high school by the end of his term. That's a long, long period of time for any one executive to have that much authority in our lives. And so the parents in this county, I think, are really fed up with the governance system here writ large, in part because of the long terms. And I heard that when I was out gathering signatures from people. Crime, we just discussed that, came up. And there were many other aspects of what's going on in the county, whether it was illegal immigration. I heard that from a lot of people. I've heard from a number of people about the school system, et cetera. So the upshot of this is, perhaps in LA, as people are feeling here, and I have my pulse on this, is that they view it as a form of cronyism, and elected officials have multiple benefits, which enable them to continue to get reelected. And it's very hard for someone who's new to the system to try to get their point across against that kind of power.
Well, it'll be interesting to see. And let's go to Nancy on this. Nancy's supporters of County Executive Marc Elrich, including long-term 21 This Week panelist Sam Statlin, call this the sore losers bill, because the spokesperson for the effort is Reardon Sullivan, who lost to Mr. Elrich handily in the last election. Regardless of what you want to call it, does the proposal have legs, and will it be adopted?
Well, let me say a couple of things. I actually ran a petition-based campaign myself. It's not that hard to get a lot of signatures, let me tell you. You get people out there, but it's not impossible at all. Look, this is an anti-Marc bill. There's no question about it. I served for 4 terms on the county council, and I didn't do bad things. the beauty of term limits is that you give more power to the staff. Is that really what people want? I don't think people think this through. I think it will pass because Montgomery County people like term limits, and by and large, it's popular. I don't think it's particularly good. With Mark aside, Ike served 3 terms. No problems with Ike as county executive for 3 terms. So you can, there are arguments to be made about changing leadership and about changing the face of Montgomery County that are legitimate. That's supposed to be resolved in elections. Hasn't worked out that way for the people who have not supported Mr. Elrich. So I think it will pass. Good for us.
So, there's always that argument, the devil you know is better than the devil you don't know. And that's sometimes what you get with term limits. Sometimes the person you're seeking to term limit, his or her replacement, I should say, is more of an anathema to you than the guy that got replaced. So we'll see what happens. It's certainly the topic du jour in the local chatterbox. So all good.
Mm.
Now we're going to switch to a really more serious topic, and this also involves your vote in November. And on the ballot this November is question number 1, is an amendment to the Maryland Constitution designed to guarantee every person the fundamental right to reproductive freedom, including the ability to prevent, continue, or end one's pregnancy without state interference. And this was in response to the overturning of Roe v. Wade by the U.S. Supreme Court. And Nancy, since 1992, the state of Maryland has permitted actually much longer before 1992, the state of Maryland permitted abortions. But in 1992, the state had a referendum on this subject, and it passed a statute that allows abortions be performed at the viability of the fetus. And many argue that that's the question. Why is this needed, and is it likely to pass?
I mean, I think the initiative is to enshrine this in a more permanent fashion that's harder to undo with the voice of the people as opposed to statutory language. That's all I can think of. I mean, I think it's likely to pass. It's an issue that's important to many people throughout the state, regardless of party affiliation, I believe. But, it's not, it doesn't solve a problem that currently exists because of what the statutory freedoms are currently in place. So, I think it's it's a political statement about the state of Maryland, if you ask me.
But it's also a statement about the language of the bill itself. I mean, certainly there were restrictions that were imposed in 1992, and that was reflective, actually, of the Roe v. Wade decision and its 3-trimester approach to abortion. And, there is a question about viability of the fetus. This is a very broadly written statute, and it's subject to misinterpretation, and it does remove that limitation of viability, which could, certainly, I mean, already we've seen advertisements of, late-term abortion providers moving into the states. So is that really something that the populace wants?
I think so. I have relatives who've had to deal with this in crisis situations and pregnancies. It's not their fault, but to think of them in a state where this would be prohibited and they could have died because of their inability. The medical institutions anxiety about prosecution for dealing with this in some states, it's a huge problem. I don't think it's a problem in Maryland, but it is a problem for some elsewhere.
And I'll ask the one last question, Nancy. Is it Maryland's responsibility to solve the problems of the United States? I mean, we certainly don't have a restriction on people coming into Maryland to have abortions performed. I mean, I'll leave it at that. I want to go to.
If you want to pick a fight about this, go ahead. But I don't think it's it's a problem. There's no demonstration of that. And the issue is something of a national issue. And we're not trying to fix other states.
Well,
You want to live there and be that way.
Well, no, I mean, I have my own reservations about this, and I personally feel it's an unnecessary bill. But the legislature passed it, and now it's up for the vote of the people. And Stacey, according to a Gallup poll, most Americans continue to believe that abortion should be legal in at least some situations. However, those numbers shift dramatically when discussing late-term abortions, with 70% of Americans opposing third trimester procedures. Again, what is the outcome likely to be in November?
Casey, I'm going to put your last two questions aside for the moment, because I am here to warn every voter and every parent who watches this show that no matter what its proponents are stating, this constitutional amendment is a Trojan horse that will take away parents' rights to protect their minor children from having an abortion or to undergo gender reassignment without their knowledge or consent. Period. It's not what's in the language, but what is deliberately left out. It doesn't say every adult person is entitled to this protection, and legislators purposely fought against language that would exclude minors. Republican legislators asked for carve-outs to protect minors from the gender reassignment. If this passes, your child would be able to go through chemical or surgical transitioning without your knowledge or consent, and the state could possibly be paying for it. This is a very dangerous path. It is a wolf in sheep's clothing. And if parents are smart about this, they will vote no on this constitutional amendment, because as Nancy just stated, it basically will become cemented into Maryland law. It would be very difficult for parents to overturn. I think Democrats might end up shooting themselves in the head if this gets passed, because if children start undergoing gender reassignment without parental consent, parents are going to say, where did this start? How could this be?
Stacey, to be fair though, I've read this. I've read this language, upside down, and while I, agree with you that it does not have a prohibition on age that an individual can seek an abortion, I don't see where the fear about gender reassignment really fits into this proposal.
Individual rights and reproductive freedom. What is reproductive freedom? It's not well defined. It doesn't say specifically that it's not gender reassignment. You can say that it's abortion, but to people that have been fighting against this up in Annapolis, to them, it's quite clear that it's linguistics legerdemain, that you're just playing with the language here. So this is, I think it's a grave threat. I think that the abortion laws are already cemented here in the state of Maryland. We have safe and legal abortion here. I tend to agree with that 70% that believe that there should be these abortion rights up to a certain period of time. And I think that we should leave it alone the way that it is.
It's interesting. And, what also surprises me about this is at least I don't hear a lot of debate on this topic. I mean, there was a demonstration 2 weeks ago at the county council building when the council was affirming their support for the constitutional amendment. But I'm surprised there aren't, ad campaigns and a more aggressive opposition to this. It's as if people just think it's going to be passed, and maybe it's just too soon before. But voting, gosh, we going to early voting in 28 days, and we'll save for another time to talk about how you get your mail-in ballot and being able to print it off the internet. But we'll do that the next time. Great discussion. Thank you. I mean, I think it's a difficult choice for some people, and it's a necessary one for us to take. Stay tuned for parting shots. Now with parting shots, Nancy Floreen.
Early voting is coming up. And hopefully the election cycle will end on the beginning of November. We'll see how that all goes. But I just wanted to remind people you should have gotten something in an email about the whole voting process. And as someone who's an election judge and will be a chief judge on election day and will be working during early voting, I wanted to remind people, if you have requested or received a ballot in the mail, please vote that way. If you come to a voting location, but you've received something in the mail, you will be permitted to vote, but you will have to do it in a certain way that is not, it's a different process. And the reason is to eliminate multiple votes by the same person. And that will simplify the process and will get your vote counted the same way as anybody else.
Okay, thank you. Stacey Sauter, your parting shot.
Thanks, Casey. And I would like to echo what Nancy just said. Nancy, thank you for that public service announcement, because I've been working as hard as I can with the Board of Elections to recruit poll workers. And so we're looking for Republican poll workers. I've held a few orientations and have been able to send several of them their way. And early voting does start soon, and then the polls will be open on October 25th through the 31st, with Election Day being November 5th. You have multiple ways to vote. If you have not gotten a mail-in ballot and you want one, you still have time to do it. So I would highly recommend that. And you do get paid as a poll worker. You get paid for your training, and you get paid during the shifts that you work. You can work an 8-hour shift or a 16-hour day, whatever is your preference. And students 16 years old and older can work the polls and gets credit for it, community service credit for it, 25 hours.
Anyway, I want to thank you both for being here today. It's a great honor. I want to thank the audience for tuning in each and every week to Montgomery County's hardest hitting political talk show. For 21 this week, I'm Casey Aiken.